In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Today we celebrate Pentecost, which was originally a Jewish holiday held 50 days after Passover. In fact, the word Pentecost comes from the Greek for 50. It's referred to as the birthday of the church because it was on this day that God equipped the church with the gifts necessary to minister to the world. Up until that point, the disciples had been flailing a bit. When Christ was with them, as we've seen, they regularly failed to understand, and once Christ was crucified, they tended to hide. Despite their weaknesses, God provided them with what they needed. There is hope for all of us. Ministry is, of course, the purpose of the church. We come together on Sundays to give thanks to God and to be strengthened to go out to do ministry, which is challenging. Doing ministry often means acting in unpopular ways for the sake of love, and taking positions that threaten the comfort of those who believe that the worldly culture is just and proper. It's not easy, of course, for any of us to have our cultural assumptions challenged, and I was grateful to a comedian who recently gave me this gift. She pointed out that every part of her body had been named by men, and sometimes for men. And I realized how very strange it would be to inhabit a body whose parts were all named by, and sometimes after, women. Instead of the loop of Henley, for example, in our kidneys, we might have the loop of Denise. Now imagine that for every body part. For me, it would be somewhat alienating. 50-50 would be fine, but every single body part? She gave me a little glimpse into what it is to be a woman in our society. Letting go of our narrow human views and turning ourselves over to God is challenging. It was a violent wind, not a cool breeze, that blew above the heads of the disciples on Pentecost. And that was followed by a burning flame. In order to be effective at ministry, we must allow the violent wind to blow away our preconceptions and the flame to ignite new ideas, new relationships, new understanding. Otherwise, we remain closed off, our minds locked from the inside, unable to extend ourselves to others, unable to form the bonds of ministry. We instead defend those rules that allow us not to change, those assumptions that do not challenge us or our positions, because it's more comfortable than putting love first. This cultural comfort must not be confused with a heart of peace granted by God. Once we have opened ourselves to the flame of the Holy Spirit that burns away our fears and insecurities, then we are ready to do the kind of radical ministry to which God calls the church. Ministry is more than just convincing people to obey the rules. It's about extending ourselves into unknown territory so that we can understand others and open up a path for healing and unity. It's about exceeding the rules, as Christ repeatedly attempted to do, though the Pharisees were always quick to condemn him, quick to reassert the rules that placed them close to the top of society. The Pharisees had the land, which means that they had the money and the leisure to follow the 613 commandments in the scriptures. One commandment was that every man should write a scroll of the Torah for himself, which required time and education. Some rules seem to contradict. Be kind to the stranger, but do not tolerate the idolater. Those who had the funds paid people to help them to follow the rules because they were so confusing. Poor people simply could not manage, so the Pharisees were always better than the poor. Thus they deserved the land that they owned. If one tried to cut through this circular reasoning, we deserve the wealth because we are better, and we can be better because we have the wealth, one could expect crucifixion. When we do succeed in ministry, it brings about a kind of communication that we thought impossible. In Acts today, people from every nation and background were able to understand the apostles as they spoke. Now, there's a common liturgical practice, you may know it, on Pentecost of reading the passage in various languages. People stand up in Spanish and Greek and Latin and so on. I've always been opposed to this because it has an effect opposite to the point of the passage. No one understands anything in that situation. It undermines the very meaning of Pentecost. When we blow away cultural structures and assumptions in order to build relationships, when we work to heal divisions based on love, we can expect resistance. This week, I was sad to read that playwright and AIDS activist Larry Kramer died. In the 80s, cultural rules prevented the discussion of AIDS. As people died, the government remained silent. In grad school, I wore a button on my book bag, "Silence equals death." I recall one senator who, when pressed for a statement, said, "A disease that kills gays, prostitutes, and drug users? That's not a problem, it's a solution." Kramer fought to bring attention to the illness and to spread life-saving information to people. Over time, he and Anthony Fauci, the same Anthony Fauci, built a bridge. Behind the scenes, a friendship grew, understanding developed, and that helped to change the course of the illness. There are always those who, like the Pharisees, attempt to co-opt religion to serve other purposes, to preserve a status quo that makes them feel comfortable. But love and the status quo do not run on the same tracks. Christ's message of radical love rocked the world then and still does now. One common way that people have attempted to co-opt the gospel is by turning it into the same kind of rule-based support of social division that the Pharisees promoted. Now, we often present this approach in terms of Old Testament versus New Testament, or rules versus love. But really, at its base, it's about division versus unity. Let me explain. I'm sure you've heard people say that the Jews killed Jesus. Now, there are many levels of misunderstanding in this statement. It assumes, for example, that Jesus was not a Jew. In fact, everyone in the story was a Jew except for Pontius Pilate and his wife. People forget his wife. But more importantly, it conceives of the world in terms of us versus them. It invites back into Christianity that very division that Christ came to heal. Christ died in part because of his teachings that we are all brothers and sisters, all in need of one another's love and assistance. He then passed that message on to his followers, the church. It is for us to carry this message to as many as will listen. It is a difficult task. Christians are always outsiders. We are in this world, but not of it. We try to exceed the rules. Love comes out of unity. Abuse comes out of division. Our witness is as important today as it was in the day of the apostles. Amen.